Welcome back to Combat Mission Battle for Normandy and the fourth mission of the Road to Montebourg campaign. We're still attacking the Fauville-Turqueville ridgeline, having pushed through the enemy positions at St and Hamelet, and we're now back with Fox Company with orders to exploit into a German position at another farm complex called Hamelet. This enemy position is the last one between us and the US airborne troops holed up in St Mere-Eglise. Once the Germans have been kicked out of this one, their whole line on the ridge should collapse. The briefing seems to think that we've already chewed up the enemy's best troops, but that the pixel truppen we'll be facing in this second line position will be well dug in, supported by mortars and possibly supported by armour. The mortars in question have spent all morning mangling one of the regiment's other battalions, attacking elsewhere along the ridge, so they are a specific target for this mission, along with the usual criteria of killing the enemy, seizing the ground and keeping my casualties to a minimum. So in other words, this format should be pretty familiar by now. The force is also familiar. I have exactly the same pixel truppen that I had in the attack on St-Mere-Eglise, except of course the ones who didn't make it. Something else I have to contend with is my ammunition. Fox Company has been in action all morning without being resupplied, and while I'm not going to run out of small arms ammunition anytime soon, once again the 105mm howitzers don't have any ammunition, and the Pioneers have a grand total of 3 demo charges between them. I can live without the howitzers, they're a bonus, but this lack of demo charges can really be a serious problem. We're still fighting in Bocage country, and a limit on how many gaps I can blast in the hedgerows translates into a limit on what avenues of approach I can use. I'm not going to be able to have the kind of freedom of movement I was able to exploit back at St-Mere-Eglise, where I could bypass enemy positions or enemy kill zones by sidestepping into the nearest convenient field. My options here are restricted to where I can go with 3 holes in Bocage. And to make matters worse, it usually takes 2 charges to blow a gap big enough for a Sherman to get through, so if I want to take my armour support with me, which would probably be a good idea, then I have to think in terms of 1 infantry gap and 1 armour gap. In other words, the fancy solution I had to this map when I first eyeballed it, namely punching along the bottom map edge, attacking up the back road and through the wood to get at the objective from the flank, isn't an option, because while I could just about manage it, I'd have next to no flexibility and I'd have to leave the tanks behind. This pretty much reduces my avenues of approach to going up the middle, fighting up this road through the barn compound here, then through the wood and into the objective from the right side of the road, or bypassing the barn compound and attacking across the open fields on the far left. Attacking across the open fields isn't as dumb as it sounds. That's pretty much exactly what I did back in the first mission on Utah Beach, and it'll work fine if I can gain fire superiority over the enemy positions on the other side of the field. And while this route is less vulnerable to flanking fire from the barn compound and the wood than it looks due to the lie of the ground, it'd still be a lot smarter to secure those areas before making a push. So I have 2 approaches here, and seeing as though they're both in the same direction, are going to be using the same long hedgerows as their base of fire position, I'm not going to have to commit right now. I'm going to be able to postpone that decision until I've got a handle on what the defence looks like. Before all that though, I've got to secure this area here. Some of it looks directly into my deployment zone, so it's probably clear, but I need to check it anyway. I also need to get across this road, which could be tricky if it's enfiladed by an enemy position, or worse, something like a stug. There is a little fire coming from some German pixel truppen up on the top floor of the barn house as the troops move up, but it's ineffective and I can't draw good enough line of sight to area fire the building, so I'll have to deal with them a bit later. More worryingly, there is an armour sound contact hanging around the barn compound. This is basically engine noise that my pixel truppen are hearing, so it's not massively accurate as to where it is or what it is, but it is a sign that something is there. The sound seems to move off though, and after dashing across the road and checking out this compound on the map edge, it quickly becomes obvious that this whole chunk of map here is clear. This lets me start moving forwards a bit faster. The Sherman platoon arrives a little way into the game, and the Germans up in the barn house take some pot shots at the opened up tank commanders as they wait to move up. This does not go well for the Germans. The aim here is to occupy this Bocage line to get eyes onto the German defences beyond on the approach to Hamelet itself. First of all, so I can see what I'm up against, and secondly, to build up a base of fire. I don't want to go off half-cocked though, so I've got a couple of detached scouts up front taking a look while I build up about a platoon's worth of infantry to man the hedgerow in strength when the time comes. Once again, it's a new area and I want to have enough bodies up front to overwhelm any enemy forces that start shooting back. Speaking of enemy forces, I decide to sneak my two scouts up behind this small arm of Bocage so they can observe the left without being exposed to the known enemy position in the barn compound. It only struck me as they were moving in that it's a good machine gun position covering the T-junction further on, and it's able to enfilade the front of the barn compound. But the Germans have clocked it, and they've set up a tripod-mounted MG42 to close that angle of approach down. Unfortunately for them, they're not watching their flank, and the two scouts get the drop on them. Getting flanked at very close range by a pair of Garans can really ruin your day, and while I'm a little concerned that my two scouts might not have the firepower to take on 5 enemy pixel truppen, they clear up pretty quickly with semi-auto rifle fire and hand grenades. It's really the best kind of firefight. Surprising an exposed enemy unit with effective fire at close range is about as one-sided as you can get with infantry. The scouts almost don't get away with it though. The enemy has built some wooden bunkers out in the fields, and the pixel truppen inside open up, so they hurriedly crawl out of sight. Job done. They've spotted some enemy positions and bagged an MG team in the process. I'll take that any day. Before I can step up to that hedgerow with my infantry, I've got to wait a couple more turns as I move a pair of Shermans across into the field. I don't want to pop the tanks up at the same time as the infantry in case that German armour contact is something nasty, or if there are any AT guns out there, but at the same time I want to have the Shermans close by in case my infantry bite off more than they can chew. Moving in, there's a bit of a surprise. That armour contact is a Marder, a German tank destroyer that is pretty much an anti-tank gun on tracks, and it's driving away from my infantry who can see right into the open unarmoured rear and quickly shoot out the crew. Presumably I've called it pulling back into a better position in depth, unless the attack AI has gotten confused and it's trying to pathfind its way around the impassable Bocage. Either way, I'll take it. More concerning than what's going on in this field is what the Germans have in the next field over to the left. When my infantry pop up here, they find another bunker built right in front of them. There's a quick firefight, but the Germans are able to put more lead out with the MG42, plus supporting fire from the first bunker a couple of hundred metres behind, and the GIs get pinned down pretty quickly. Luckily, there aren't any casualties, and I'm able to roll one of the Shermans up to engage the bunker at pretty much point-blank range. In contrast to the bunkers in the first mission at WN3, these seem to last a lot longer than I was expecting, especially seeing as though the close one is under fire from a tank, just 70 metres away, shooting directly into the firing slit, but they are eventually knocked out by sustained fire. By this time I have 3 of my 4 Shermans online, and they're happily shooting the crap out of anything they can see. A German Panzerschreck team has a go at one of them, but it misses and gets shot down for its trouble. But there's a greater threat out on the left. Something fires several shots at my leftmost Sherman, and taking a look at the projectiles, they're not specifically modelled like Panzerfaust or Panzerschreck rounds are, they're generic projectile traces. This basically means that something out there is firing shells at my tank, which I don't like. It could be an AT gun, and following the tracer back I can pick out a good AT gun position on one of the Bocage lines, which I immediately start dropping 60mm mortar bombs on, or it could be enemy armour of some description. Either way, I don't want to lose a tank. The bulk of the enemy forces out in the fields have just been destroyed, so it's safe for my infantry to man the hedgerow without armour support, and I can pull the Shermans back a little. With my fire support position secure and troops on hand to beat down any more enemy positions which show themselves, it's time to start moving forward again. This means clearing out the barn compound just forward and right of my base of fire, but first I have to get to it. This is a little tricky. I have a couple of options. I can move up the road, which despite the fact that I've crossed with a significant force without any indication that the enemy have it covered, still seems like a bad idea, or I can blast through the Bocage here and get in this way. This is also less than ideal because there isn't any way into the compound from this side unless I blow another hole, which I'm reluctant to do because I don't have enough demo charges. So if I want to go in this way, my pixel truppen will have to go around the side of the compound, exposing themselves to any German positions covering that angle. I don't like either of these options, so in the end I decided to do both, leading with 2-man scout teams. It was all for nothing in the end. Neither approach is covered, and I'm able to get bodies inside the barns on the right and the farmhouse on the left without any trouble. Putting more troops into the mix and moving to clear more barns results in a nasty little ambush. There are some German troops at the end of the compound behind some Bocage who gun down 2 of my pixel truppen. My GIs were probably too exposed crossing the yard like that, but I would eventually have to set foot in that compound at some point, and the layout of the buildings, the Bocage and the trees makes it quite difficult to set up any reliable overwatch. After a turn or 2 I'm able to get a little suppressive fire out from the top floor of the farmhouse, and bring up another squad on the left to close in from that flank and put some fire down before making the assault on the right. There was a good number of enemy pixel truppen up there, most of whom were killed by all the suppressive fire, and the survivors get finished off by the assault teams. It just goes to show that firing off copious amounts of ammunition in the general direction of the enemy really does pay off sometimes. With the barn compound cleared, the next obstacle on the right is the wood. It's separated from the barns by a hedgerow, which once again I'm reluctant to blast through, and when sending a scout team around the right flank through the edge of the field draws MG fire and results in a casualty, it seems pretty clear that pushing this angle would require a major relocation of my fire support. I really don't have time for something like that, especially when it looks like at least the close edge of the wood is clear and I can leave my base of fire in place and advance up the left side of the barns and wood to get to the objective area. At the same time, I'm also keen to start moving up on the far left along the map edge. I'm well set up to dominate the face of the objective area in the fields, and with the wood and the barn compound cleared out, it's going to be safe enough for my pixel truppen to advance. Using up my last 2 demo charges to make a tank-sized gap, I'm able to move up here with tank support, although the Sherman I send in is preceded by infantry and hugs the terrain to show a smaller target as possible. Pushing here reveals a trench complex in the back of the objective, which looks like it's manned by the mortar teams I'm after. I've been wondering where they were, and with some suppressive small arms fire from the infantry and soon after from my armour, I've got a nice juicy target to aim at on this flank. The Germans do get some mortars off, but the enemy mortar teams who aren't quickly suppressed drop their mortars off target on the edge of the barn complex where they fail to inflict any casualty. By now I've moved some troops up to the objective compound, finding the first building full of rubble and dead enemy pixel truppen, and with the coast seemingly clear, I move in a couple more teams. Unfortunately, this isn't as safe a position as it seemed, and an enemy team with another MG42 is set up in a barn across the road where they can keyhole into the far side of the building and take out 3 of my GIs. That's all they get though. My fire support is still there and they can still level the building. Some of the Germans scatter, only to be gunned down, and the rest attempt to surrender. Things are going pretty well, but I am steadily running out of time, and I actually throw a wrench into my own carefully laid plans here. I've been trying to call my own off-map mortars onto that trench system for about 15 minutes now, but the platoon HQ I have calling a fire mission in either isn't very good, or it doesn't have a good enough view of the impacting spotting rounds to correct them onto the target quickly. When the mission does finally come in, there is an awful lot more dispersion than I was anticipating, to the point that a mortar bomb almost lands on some of my pixel truppen across the road and I have to pull them back. This is one of the downsides of using off-map mortars. They're considerably less accurate than when they're fired at the shorter ranges you tend to get with on-map mortars. It's a little annoying to have to stop the advance, especially for the front runners who have to hold up and suffer a few near misses, but I can clearly see mortar bombs landing inside the enemy trenches, so I let it slide on the basis that it's probably hurting them more than it's hurting me. In fact, it's enough to tip them over the edge, and only a few turns after the bombardment, the enemy surrenders when my GIs look like they're going to move in and clear them out. Once again, a surrender makes for a total victory, but looking at the casualties, it's pretty clear that I shouldn't have had much problem mopping up the objective area in the last few minutes. The enemy has lost 53 dead, 22 wounded, and had 3 men taken prisoner, along with losing a marder, while I've lost 3 dead and 8 wounded. Interestingly, the possible AT gun firing on my tank earlier was actually a 75mm infantry gun, which was a possibility that I hadn't considered. It would probably explain why it didn't do a good job of hitting my Sherman, and in any case the counterfire dumped on them by the 60mm mortar did its job and wiped the crew out. All in all, this was another scenario revolving around the basics. It was noticeably more awkward to get things to work than in the previous missions. There were some areas, especially around the barn complex, where the terrain really forced those close-in fights that are a lot more even than I like, and that's not a bad thing. It's only reasonable for the campaign to get more difficult as time goes on. In the grander scheme of things, we've pushed our way through the German positions on the Fauville-Turqueville ridge, and we've now got a clear run at bolstering the airborne hold-up in St Mere-Eglise. The campaign is split into 4 sets of 4 missions, and it looks like for the next batch we'll be leaving Easy and Fox companies behind and jumping over to some more defensive missions with the airborne pocket, which should be interesting, not least because the American paras have some fairly significant differences in organisation and equipment from the line infantry. So there's that to look forward to, guys. It might be a bit further in the future than I was anticipating. I've definitely been seeing some interesting behaviour from the enemy tech AI in this mission, where they've done some dumb stuff, and I think I'm going to have to reinstall the latest patch to fix it. The problem is that I'm playing a multiplayer game at the same time, and I don't want to mess around the game too much until that is over in case it breaks it. So it might be a while until we get back on the road to Montebourg, but I'm determined to finish it off, and I'm sure I can cook up something interesting in the meantime. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Don't forget to comment, rate and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.